Loki's struggling.
Cool. Awesome. All right. Hi, everyone. Welcome to my YouTube channel, The Fang Girl. We're currently here at Draper Startup House. I'm here with Sia, who is the head of partnerships, marketing, and communications here at Draper Startup House Singapore. So excited to have you here.
Thank you for having me here, Emily.
Today we're going to talk about the startup scene here in Singapore, what Draper Startup House is about, and kind of just hear from the expert herself about the tech landscape here.
Mainly my goal is to be able to share and put startups in the spotlight, to share about why they're doing what they're doing. Because with Draper Startup House, our goal at the end of the day is to enable 1 million entrepreneurs by 2030. By enabling entrepreneurs to be able to start their businesses, essentially the world would be a better place. This was done mostly through Draper Startup House being like a hostel chain, and so our roots to hospitality is very strong. But what we realized that at the end of the day, with the people in the space, it's really about the human connections. When you meet people, founders sharing their vision, their missions, and then investors who are increasingly purpose-driven in the space, and also at the same time getting to know more about why entrepreneurs are doing it and what drives them to go forward and greater heights.
Can you give us some context around what the startup scene currently looks like here in Singapore, and just from your own personal experiences? Because you meet so many people, not just here locally, but those coming from overseas and wanting to do like a soft launch here.
Yes, absolutely. Okay, so maybe a bit of background context. In a pre-COVID world, one thing that we saw was initially, primarily our target audience used to be digital nomads and backpacking, traveling entrepreneurs. And slowly we realized that with entrepreneurs coming into the space, you also see investors coming in, keen to find out more about like, oh, what's this space? Why are there like people here and stuff like that? In a pre-COVID world where travel was booming, people that were staying with us were a lot of business travelers who were interested to find out more about what sort of resources they can get and how can they possibly expand from their home country into Singapore, into Southeast Asia. So that was really, really interesting because you really meet a lot of different founders who are coming in because they are here for programs or they really have their schedule packed. And it's really interesting because like the software that we helped to provide was beyond the physical space. It was the opportunity for people to be able to network through our happy hours. We had daily like happy hours, so it's more of like people staying with us can also get to meet people who are in the area, and also finding us through Eventbrite or Meetup. We were running things from as general as like happy hours to book clubs, things on self-development and personal growth. It's really interesting because a lot of these things are actually very ground up initiatives, not exactly by us only, but there are other people who are coming forth who are like, oh, I want to contribute to the community and build the data science community, build the book club, and all these initiatives which were really empowering and amazing. So that was like in a pre-COVID world. Then COVID kind of hit, and it was very interesting because like for me, the way that I saw community was that in the past we were very expat and very much more in the international scene. So even like locals don't really know about us, even though we are in the startup space. Because of COVID, caused us to re-look into like the way that we were engaging in the community. Countries, for example, like Bangalore, in India, for example, where our community there is very domestic, and in the sense of like you get more local entrepreneurs staying with us, and that was very interesting because I was just wondering like, oh, how can we do that same, like do something similar in Singapore sense, although we don't like have the hostel space for people to stay with us anymore. More and more universities and colleges emphasizing on entrepreneurship, be it a module that they take before the recent like NOC hype as well, because like there's so many like up and coming unicorns or founders who used to be the part of the NUS Overseas College program, but before that, like it wasn't very obvious, and you do see like there are more and more like people who are interested in the entrepreneurship scene, who are students, but in the past, actually because we were hostel, right, so one thing that we saw was that the people that came into the space were people who sometimes are backpacking on a hiatus from work, and usually those are like people in their later 20s, which is quite interesting because Initially, I think at the start, when we were looking at audience demographics, we were thinking that people who were staying in hostels would be in their early 20s to early 30s.
Yeah.
But together, when you meet traveling entrepreneurs, actually the demographic is a bit more mature in a sense where maybe they have about 5 to 10 years work experience, maybe in the finance sector or something like that, and then experiencing a little bit of burnout, and then after that they are deciding like where to go next. And you get that quite often in the startup space actually, like people who feel very burnt out from like the corporate bureaucracy and occasionally the routine and mundane lifestyle. So from there it's like actually our audience demographic was realistically speaking like late 20s to even early 40s. With the local entrepreneurship scene over here, you have kind of like the student demographic, which is up and coming. And then there's also the others who fall into the category that I mentioned before, but like the locals. And then there's the expats who are also like building, or not expats, but like just generally like non-Singaporeans who have come here to decide to start.
I think one thing that you mentioned too is like hostels are generally meant for, I guess, like younger 20s, like traveling through, right? They have like backpacks and they're really just like passing through the country and just trying to find a network here. But I think the house, like Draper Startup House, it's really like a home, right? It's a community of people, and you do get a lot of people who come from diverse backgrounds, but you also have locals here who are entrepreneurs. So it's pretty awesome to kind of witness that.
I mean, because I think especially with COVID and hospitality, that's one thing, but also realizing that opportunity that we could engage with the local community over here. So in the past it was like 30% Singaporeans, 70% foreigners, travelers, expats, and occasional like stumblers who kind of walk past our backyard and see like we were hosting like networking sessions. You get to meet like Googlers, people who are hustling with their day jobs and also having a side job and working on their own startup. A bit of everything.
I think that's why I also enjoy coming to Draper Startup House. I feel like everyone here is working on something very interesting all the time. If I were an entrepreneur who had no context about Draper Startup House, like what are the type of resources or the, I guess, like things I can expect from just joining the community?
This is
it's a lot.
It's a lot. From the community standpoint, I think the most important thing is at the end of the day you have support. Because one thing that we realized from even the days when we were a hostel in Singapore is you see people who come into the space, usually like they're like traveling alone as well, right? So if you take the chance to like chat with them, they'll share that they're working on this idea, they're working on taking their startup idea and like launching it, that sort of thing. But also at the same time they do share on a more personal level that it gets a bit lonely sometimes with the whole startup journey, especially maybe like because of corporate burnout, then you kind of take the leap and not everyone can understand that. Your social circle family not always very supportive, and sometimes people are also wondering like, you look like you had everything in the past, like why do you suddenly just jump the gun and decide to do your own startup? Like it's kind of like starting from ground zero again. So in terms of mental wellness, that's primarily I feel like what we try and advocate for, because in a community that feels supported, at least they can relate with one another. And I think like that's what's so important in getting people to get together and to be able to account to one another in that sense. Our demographics can be broken down into entrepreneurs on the different stages of their startup journey. So there are some people who are like maybe still kind of trying to figure out what's happening in their life or how to turn from corporate into running their own startup. So we have like the pre-accelerator education side, which is like through Draper University at this point of time. But it provides you with a 2-week fundamental course on entrepreneurship. So at least like what's all these buzzwords, what's cap table, what's fundraising, all the terms that I would say it's probably like more common in the US, like things that you would see over there. And in Singapore, like this is still something that people are learning about. So like that's how we kind of plug in the education piece. And then there are also other things where like community aspect on that end, I try to help out with mentor happy hours or things like office hours, but but when you put the word office, it sounds very cold. So like I try to make it that I try to make it a bit more warm and inviting in the sense where at the end of the day, it's kind of like, well, you get mentors who are experienced in entrepreneurship, in getting investments and stuff like that. So basically we invite them in to support the other people. And they've been really, really helpful in kind, like, or from an investor's point of view, like what would this look like? Yeah. And then we also have like virtual pitch nights to help get entrepreneurs used to pitching, as much as possible, like high touch points in keeping the human experience over there. So like in the past, this would have been through like networking sessions as well, and right now it's mostly pretty much all virtual, but still happening. And then of course there are some people who are taking ideas to MVP stage, and sometimes they don't really know how to build their MVPs, so Draper Startup House Services helps with that. / Mission Plus, who helps with rapid prototyping, which is kind of like, instead of taking 2 months to build a website, you have 2 weeks to build something up. We don't really have a fund yet, but we are a global syndicate. So Draper Startup House Ventures is really interesting, because in the past it was always like, entrepreneurs coming into the space and they're kind of like, oh yeah, I'm also looking for like funding, and then we kind of realize, and it used to be in a situation of like, oh yeah, we know someone in the VC space that might be a good fit, so we will make that connection. And I guess like one thing good about COVID was that it kind of catalyzed the process for us, because we had to think of a way to not just reach out to, not just have to be physically in different locations, but how can we digitize that process but keep the warm touch, which is so important, because like you need to know that these startups are credible, like these founders are reliable and stuff like that. So we still help with that, and basically like Draper Startup House Ventures has been doing that through pitchathons, and then and reaching out to like our global investor database. I think so far like one thing that really sets us apart from the other communities or like venture syndicates is the fact that we have a huge global database. So sometimes like startup, from what we hear at least, like from the startups, is that we've reaching out to get fund, to raise capital. Sometimes they've already exhausted all their local contacts. So of course, when you're hungry to like get funding, for example, someone in Philippines who's looking for funding has already reached out to all the VCs over there. On the other hand, we have the connections to like the US, for example, or like the 24 Draper funds as well, and so like that's an additional resource for them to plug into. And it's been really interesting, because at least you see these conversations that are happening beyond borders, to be able to be borderless and seamless in that. That's incredible for me.
I mean, there's so many advantages of entrepreneurs coming to Draper Startup House.
It's very much on building like the Draper Entrepreneurial Network. So that's kind of like our virtual welcome lobby. Like you get, of course, an invite to Slack, which is kind of like where our virtual community is at right now. One thing that we are using this for is, for example, we've had like community members who are like based in Turkey and looking at relocating to Singapore. So instantly like we just plug them into a CT channel to kind of like put a face behind the community as well. So at least they know that, like the community is real, like there are people here. We also had someone from, I think, Nairobi join us.
Wow,
That's so it's awesome. Really fun. Because with that, I mean, it's really just kind of like putting a face to the different entrepreneurs in the space. That helps me with profiling on who our community is, and at the end of the day, how we can better serve them.
Gotcha. And I think it's amazing how global your network is at Draper Startup House. So I think it's incredibly important. I guess in terms of like your words of encouragement to the entrepreneurs coming into Singapore, like what would you say to them? What words of wisdom would you give to them? Because you know so much and you've kind of seen entrepreneurs come in and out of this space.
Personally, like what I'm thinking of right now is that inertia is your greatest enemy, right? What creates inertia is the idea of perfection. And also like when you realize like when you're working in the startup world, a lot of things are fast paced, but I definitely want to emphasize on the part that like not to be intimidated by that, although sometimes it gets quite overwhelming. Like personally, like when you see so many like founders on their own journeys, it's so scary because you see like people who are productive to different levels. Everyone is very much on their own journey, and also at the same time, like there will always be support as we're on this journey to kind of enable 1 million entrepreneurs. Like we are very much about like connecting, right? And don't be afraid to ask for help or like to just share about yourself. The way that I see things is that at the end of the day, we're all humans. And like art very much like work in progresses. Connect, inspire, empower.
Well said.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Sia, for like giving your insights and sharing your lessons about the tech landscape here in Singapore. If anyone wants to connect with Draper Startup House or connect with you personally, what's the best way for them to do that?
I mean, with Draper Startup House is definitely through the Den. The Draper Entrepreneurial Network is just very much like a virtual community. That's supposed to get people through the doors at the end of the day. then.draperstartuphouse.com.
If you found this video helpful or informative, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to stick along with the Fang Girl and our journey here.